Hello, John.
Hey, Jessica.
Nice to see you again. It's been a while.
Yeah, nice seeing you as well.
Yeah, I think you were the third guest, I think, on Niche Conversations, and yeah,
Yeah, that was
way
like
back.
pre-pandemic, pre-kids, everything. So
Yeah, wow. Woo.
yes,
Um, yeah. So, welcome everyone to Niche Conversations. I'm Jessica DeWitt. I'm one of the editors here at the network in Canadian history and environment. And today I am joined by John Baeten. Do you want to tell us about yourself?
sure. Yeah, I'm John Baeten. I live in Bloomington, Indiana, which is the only part of Indiana I could ever live in. I got my PhD at Michigan Tech in industrial heritage and archaeology.
Mhm.
I'm an archaeologist by degree, but I've been doing work in GIS and kind of teaching as well for a while. So that's me.
Yeah. Yeah, and we've known each other for a while, which we're going to be talking about today. So I featured one of John's pieces from 2016 on Niche. I just kind of sometimes I focus on things that have been written in the past. I re-earthed them, and this was part of the Seed series, which was the first series that I ever edited for Niche. It was when we were both grad students and we were members of the American Society for Environmental History grad student caucus. So I organized a series that was published on Niche and on Edge Effects. So that's kind of fun. It's kind of like an origin story for me as
Hmm.
well. And this piece was Busting Ghosts, Building an HGIS to Reveal Historical Mine Waste Producers and Develop Strategies to Mitigate Future Risk. And it was based on your dissertation research. So we're going to be touching upon that today and kind of looking back and then looking forward to how you use that in your current capacities.
Cool.
So the first thing I want to talk about, and I think it's a question that's mainly I always want to know an answer to. Your dissertation explored mining landscapes through the lens of environmental history and industrial heritage. And what are the differences between these two fields, and how do they complement each other? This is something that I'm kind of curious about because no one has ever like sat down and explained it to me, even though it seems like we're often in conversation with each
Hmm.
other. So.
Yeah, to start, I'll say just with that title of that article,
Mhm.
"Busting Ghosts," I recommend anybody who's writing to search Urban Dictionary before they publish something. I did not know that "busting ghosts" is also a phrase for farting, and so I should have probably picked something different, but it's in the past. I learned that after the fact. Yeah, so I guess the difference between environmental history and industrial heritage. I was writing this again in 2017, and so it's like a bit long ago, right? And
Mhm.
so I think industrial heritage has shifted quite a bit. But how I kind of see it is that environmental history as a field does an exceptional job of kind of narrating how things in the past took place, how
Mhm.
people in the past's perceptions of the environment and of kind of society shifted and changed and things of that nature. Um, and and kind of looking at how environments at large have changed. Industrial heritage, on the other hand, really focuses on, at least in 2017, it was really focused on kind of how can we celebrate our industrial past without ever really kind of
Mhm.
really focused on things like economic and technological nostalgia, right? So look at the grandeur of what we did in the past. Look at the great things that these technologies have done. Look at these, amazing
Mhm.
feats of man and things like that. So the differences were a little bit in terms of the environmental impacts between the two. A lot of the environmental histories that have been written, and this again is changing too, were very, I'm trying to think of the word that Bill Cronin would always use, declensionist, I believe,
Yes.
right? So kind of, these are doom and gloom stories, right? And industrial heritage, with the exception of things like labor relations, when they're talking about, yeah, the,
Mhm.
capitalists put the worker down, they were celebratory, right? They weren't things that were grandly, kind of critical of things. And so I think the intersection of them, or how they can both kind of complement one another, is in terms of industrial heritage, is bringing in things to maybe not to celebrate, to at least recognize that
Mhm.
there's some negative things that, yeah, we shouldn't celebrate, that there was tons of PCBs dumped in some lake or something like that. but we need to recognize it, right? And by recognition, we can start to kind of have a better appreciation of what happened, as well as maybe how to kind of approach it, right? How do we reclaim this? How do we let future generations know that these things happened? And in terms of environmental history, I think that industrial heritage, or looking at kind of heritage studies, could be useful in terms of bringing kind of these stories that we tell and this knowledge we have of the past to the present in forms of like interpretation, in forms of kind of current site kind of recognition and things like that. And I know a lot of environmental historians are already doing that, and a lot of industrial archaeologists and industrial heritage folks are doing this as well, in terms of recognizing kind of the more dirty aspects of our past. Again, this is 2017, and it's so like it's such a long time ago. Trying to remember, like, I know what my dissertation was about, but I haven't talked about it in a long time. So
same.
yep.
Yeah, and I encountered industrial heritage, some scholarship industrial heritage when I was looking at one of the state park systems I looked at was Pennsylvania, and a lot of the state parks in Pennsylvania, particularly the early ones, were created on post-industrial land. So there's a lot of industrial heritage stuff going on there. But I appreciate the definition you just gave, and that makes sense to me. And the celebratory versus the more critical at times, and kind of piecing them together as critical. And maybe, I don't know, I guess environmental history isn't devoid of people, but industrial heritage seems to take into account more the economic realities maybe of these places, and people have to work and make a living and that sort of thing. And that will shape the character of a place.
Sure.
Just as much as the environmental stuff will.
Yeah, in terms of like industrial heritage, you go to these mining sites especially, and it's like, come visit the world's largest pit, and it's like, sweet, come look at the world's largest stamp mill, or and it's like, cool, I guess. I don't know. I guess it's neat if you're like into that, and I kind of am. But it's like there's more to it. There's more nuance, right? And it's just one of those things that we should recognize that this is the world's largest pit, right? But we should also talk about like, well, what were the ramifications of this? Yeah, we got tons of iron out of it. We got tons of copper out of it, right? It helped us expand our, it helped us develop society. But it also did some other stuff, right? We got to talk about it, right? We got to grapple with these things that aren't as, rose-colored glasses as we might want. So.
Your description of that is it's taking me back to my youth in Western Pennsylvania, where one of my favorite places to visit was Pit Hole, which was it's basically just a field now with streets like the lot, like mown where they used to be, and like markers. It was an oil boom town called Pit Hole, and it's in the middle of nowhere in Pennsylvania, but you can visit it, and I just thought it was really cool. So that's a little bit of industrial heritage for you. So we've talked about this last time we were on, but you're an HGIS guy or a GIS guy. And how did you employ historical GIS in your dissertation when you're looking at these mining landscapes?
Sure. So in terms of like my dissertation research, I was curious. It was focused on the Mesabi Iron Range in northern Minnesota. So like the largest and most productive iron range in North America, home to Bob Dylan and things like that. What I was curious about was not just kind of like what was the extent of mining. So like not just where like the mines were, right? Because that data was already kind of available. But I was interested in how did the mining landscape how like extensive was it, but also kind of like how impactful was it? And so in terms of HGIS, what I tried to do was figure out a way to kind of recreate to the best of my ability in like 2015, 2016, 2017. Again, I think if I would be approaching this now, I'd have like, it would have been such a cooler like project. Maybe not a cooler project. There's so many more tools that are available now.
Yeah.
What I tried to do is see how much of the mining landscape can we map, right? And this included things like the individual mines where mines were extracting ore, but also things like the processing plants. And one of the things that data hadn't been collected for at a government scale or at an academic scale were processing facilities. And processing facilities, in my opinion, as an archaeologist, somebody who's like documented these things in the past, are so much cooler than mines. The processing facilities are like where the technologies are, but it's also where like 90% of mine waste comes from. And so what I tried to do was document not just where the mines are, but also where the processing facilities were, and try to tie those two things together. And then also in terms of like an environmental aspect, how much waste were these processing facilities producing and how much water were they consuming? And so what I tried to do was a general kind of multi-field join from historic trade journals that I went through, a ridiculous amount of trade journals. I had some type of like a record of this at one time, at 38,000 fields of data or something like that from 1895 to 1980, or no, I think to like 2016 maybe is when I stopped, of annual mine production for all of the mines in northern Minnesota. And that was mapped. And then using some formulas after figuring out where all these processing facilities were, I was able to calculate the kind of environmental footprint that these mines produced at a granular kind of time scale, so per year, as well as a coarse one over time. And so that's kind of how HGIS kind of was used in my dissertation. The kind of illuminating thing that HGIS allowed me to do was, rather than just saying, hey, this landscape made a lot of iron and it consumed a lot of water and it made a lot of waste, we were able to say, well, let's kind of look at where some of these biggest processing plants were. And now let's take this HGIS database and compare it to kind of some current environmental databases, looking at different watersheds and trying to figure out, are there correlations between iron mining, which is often kind of portrayed by the mining industry as being fairly like benign, like in terms of environmental impacts, but are there correlations between historical iron mining and current kind of water quality in Minnesota, right? And so we were able to kind of look at those things as well. And surprise, surprise to any environmental historians, there are correlations between historic mining and impaired waters. It's kind of like duh, right? But it's true. And once you actually have those data, that information can be utilized by different stakeholders to leverage, different kind of initiatives in terms of like preservation and stuff like that.
And you worked with a team of people, right? Is that correct?
Yeah. So in my dissertation, I worked with Nancy Langston. She was my advisor. And then I also worked closely with Don Lafreniere, who is a GIS specialist. He's also, I think, the chair right now at the Social Sciences Department at Michigan Tech. And then those were kind of the two main people I worked with. My committee had Melissa Baird was on it as well, and then Fred Quevic. But yeah, in terms of like the work that went into it, it was I did most of like the historical research in terms of like the mining landscapes and stuff like that. Those really helped and assisted in terms of kind of like theoretical grasping of things by Nancy and then by Don with the HGIS. I remember I had this database and I kind of knew what I was doing. I did a lot of GIS before my dissertation. And with my master's work, but also when I was at the Forest Service. But I had no idea like what a join was and like how do you bring tabular data into a GIS. And so Don was super helpful with that. And those like little tricks, I'm using those today in my current job. So it's kind of cool like that these things still like are useful. So
that's good. Yeah, which we're gonna get to in a moment. I mean, when I was a PhD student, I worked in the historical GIS lab here at the University of Saskatchewan, and I feel like I've lost all of the skills. I can't believe that like in 2016 I was writing like lessons for GIS, and now like
it's kind of crazy.
Maybe it would come back to me. I think I appreciate you talking about the data that you had to collect and stuff. It's GIS can be a lot of work, and that's why I ultimately abandoned the idea of it for my dissertation. I originally was going to be using GIS, and then if I wanted to finish ever, still took a long time, but it would have taken like 5 more years, I think. Anyways, so wrapping up today, just to talk about what you're doing now. So you're working outside of academia.
Hmm.
And I wonder if we want to talk about like how your dissertation and your training during your dissertation kind of helped you or led you down this career path.
Sure. So yeah, I am. Yeah, right now I'm currently the GIS coordinator for Monroe County, which is the county that Bloomington is in.
Mm-hmm.
I came to Bloomington as a postdoc at Indiana University in 2018, and I was at IU teaching and doing research. I actually led like a historical GIS lab there from 2018 till 2022, until there was a big kind of political shift at IU where we have interesting things happening. And so I saw it as a great kind of opportunity to kind of see what else was out there. And I started with Monroe County in August. And it's a position doing GIS, right? And so if I hadn't had, I think, this extensive background in GIS, it would have been very kind of challenging to land a job like this.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of like how my dissertation and just like previous work has helped or assisted with it, two ways, probably more than two ways. Getting a PhD and working with the people I have and just like spending time in environmental history and going to conferences, I think just made me like a better person. It made me like a more well-rounded individual, able to kind of recognize more like, I don't know, just like nuance in life and things like that. So I think that was like a huge thing. It just kind of like made me, I don't know, just better, I feel like, as a person.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things. But I think in terms of like the dissertation work, having like a background that's interdisciplinary, I can speak to all these different county employees that I work with and county citizens. I do tons of like data requests for county citizens and things like that. So that's been great. I work with stormwater people all the time. So I've got like, I can speak their language. I can speak the language of like people in planning. I work for the surveyor's office, which is doing like all of this stuff with like compasses and figuring out where section corners are within townships. And as an archaeologist, I did the same type of thing with my job. But then the historical GIS thing, I'd recently worked on a project with our recorder's office that was looking at racial covenants across Bloomington. And what a racial covenant is, for folks that don't know, most people here know what a homeowners association is. And what a homeowners association is, they can say, okay, if you want to live in this area, you have to follow these rules. One of the rules are you can only have a fence that's 5 feet tall, and that fence can only be blue, or something like that. Something terrible that people in suburbs have to deal with. What a racial covenant is very similar. It's a restriction on developments that said, only white people can live here, right? And these are legally binding restrictions that aren't recognized anymore, but they're still tied to people's locations today. And so the recorder's office identified these, had this big kind of like database, and I helped them map that. And the reason why I was able to help them map that is because I did the same thing with mines, right? And tying these things together. And so then this got into a public facing database, and it's out there now, and it's getting some, drawing a lot of interest from these people who actually live in these areas that still have these covenants, or these houses that still have these covenants, so they can remove them from it. So yeah, it's been super helpful in a number of ways. I can't really point to mining as one of them, or environmental history as one, but they've all made me kind of more well-rounded, is what I'll say. And I'm still like old punk rock John, but I'm like, I'm a more like well-rounded guy. So yeah.
Excellent.
And I can talk at length, as you know, so I will be quiet.
Yeah, I enjoy your story, and I think it's always important for us to talk about like those of us who do end up leaving, like why and how that happens. And also, I remember like when I was a young PhD student, and I was learning HGIS, everyone's like, HGIS is the thing that will get you a job outside of academia. You're sure to get a job outside of academia if you this skill. So it's interesting to see people who have actually landed jobs with that, and I do find, I didn't hold on to my HGIS skill, but it is my digital skills that are making it possible for me to make the way that I'm making. And yeah, no one cares. No one so far has cared that I'm a park historian or that I know a lot about parks, right? But they care that I have like the critical skills, that I'm an interesting person who knows how to do both the humanities, skills and the digital skills. And yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's been a total trip, just like the trajectory of things like that. But again, like the GIS thing, and just being interdisciplinary and being interested in the past and being kind of interested in the present and like understanding how we got here and why we got here.
Yeah.
Those are important things, right? And if you can communicate those things to people, it's like the world is your oyster. Actually, it's not, but you maybe have a good shot doing something. So.
Yeah, yeah. You have a good chance, a better chance in some ways.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, I like our tinge of pessimism.
Oh, you have to be thick with it. I think it's very true. So.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, this was a really nice chat. It was good to see
Yeah,
you.
good seeing you, Jessica, and
Yeah,
thanks for inviting me. And
yeah,
I would look forward to hearing about more of these.
yeah. Excellent. Okay. Take care, John. Thanks.
Yeah, see ya.
Bye.
Bye.